Now that is as close to perfection as I have seen so far. Thank you so much for that, Peter. Obviously, you know your period, and you've thought out some of the other period scoring quite well in different elements. And you've given me an entry that is pretty much ready to go to the stands. There are a few little scoring things that I think you could work on a little bit to make it a little clearer. A couple of places in your winds where you go from, like you add parts and split voices and so on in places that really do need to have separate stems and so on. But we can work on that as it comes. So really, just so much beauty, so much. There's some of this that just feels instinctive. That as if you are in that period and you are of that period, scoring what feels natural, right? Yeah. And then there are just so many nice touches that also, although you were evoking Beethoven and the late classical period, you're also, I'm also hearing some of your own voice come through in places. And, part of that is your proportions and your contrasts and so on. So really well done. So this may be a shorter evaluation, mainly just because there isn't a whole lot wrong, for me to pick apart. However, I will talk about some things that really work well and why they work well. So starting off here at the beginning, does the intro set the mood effectively? I think it's very beautiful. Horns and clarinets working together in harmony under the oboe solo. This will all work very well. It'll work way better than the mock-up is showing, because the horn players will play under a little bit here. And the mock-up just doesn't understand how the players would balance. And just, really basic, pedal G's in the bassoons and so on. Yeah. But, more or less, this will work fine. Notice how Peter is avoiding, he's avoiding stopped pitches for the most part. So, in fact, I would say on this, on this whole first page, they're all nicely open pitches. So, yeah, and using the horn in D, I had some recently. I had some entries recently, or one or two entries that had gone to horn in G, but used like C basso horns. Like flute, oboe, 1-2. I prefer the plural even with this kind of layout, but maybe I'm wrong. Still, it's I just think very clear, precise entry. I love the slur to the half bar here. Yeah, just a lot of choices which to me appeared obvious, weren't obvious to a lot of other people. Peter seems to have picked up on some of the same aesthetics and the same logistics that I did. So well done. That's just from my perspective. Some people might really disagree and say, I don't agree with Peter's approach at all. But I think that they would have to really justify that statement, with a very high understanding of Beethoven's craft, right? And, more than I want to get into, without turning every single one of these evaluations into a 5-hour lecture. So, beautifully done on the intro. Okay, next question. Does the melody start with elegance? Here we've got a flute over first violins and octaves. And once again, this is that it can be a bit absorptive below the pitch of D, but as the flute climbs way up here, that you'll hear more and more of it, rather than it getting swallowed in the resonance of the strings. I think this is lovely right in here. This slur, yeah. By having the winds sort of follow the bowing of the strings, you'll get very almost an exaggerated sense of unity. You could easily have just put a slur over these whole phrases if you had wanted to. That would be fine. One thing I think, I realize you yourself are a string player and you have probably thought out a lot of these things. But I just want to sort of point out that I think at this bar, you'll probably have. I can imagine the concert master just scratching out this this long slur here, right? So that they can just go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, right? And then also just normalizing this to the beam group, right? So that just slurring across two beats and so on. I don't really see any need for this slur here to add any emphasis to the upbeat going into the next bar. And in fact, I think it distracts a little bit. But I also understand your interest in subtleties and and nuances and so on. So that I do respect. So does the melody start with elegance? I would say so. Is there a natural flow here? I love the pattern in the violas, the pizzicato and the double basses, and horns and cellos working together here. I think that's all really beautiful. And and then just this that sounding G against the rise and fall of the phrase here. Yeah. It's interesting that you go to a mezzo forte here. I think that you could have just easily stayed at piano and gotten the same kind of intensity of expression, right? But it works. Just yeah. And seeing as how you really kind of you avoid being heavy-handed anywhere else, it's justifiable. Do you expand without clogging up? You have a beautiful open sound here, kind of Mozartian, early Beethoven, just having a nice open architecture. I love the idea of the clarinet, first clarinet doubling the firsts, right? And then, and then bassoon kind of working inside here in harmony with the seconds and so on. Yeah, that's just a lot of really cool stuff. And so it's the natural transition to octaves is obvious. That's all taken care of. So really good first statement. Then we get to the leggermente. Thank you for not leaving it out. You as a string player probably would see the need for that attitude, right? It's not enough just to slur some 16th notes, in a very exposed soloistic passage or essentially unaccompanied passage. It's also important to emphasize the quality of nimbleness and agility, right? So yeah, and just a straight up transcription to violins and cellos, that works fine, and it sets things up here like dramatically, after you had this, almost a tutti here, pushing forwards, right? So piano crescendo, like a lot of this in the sense of the piano score, that's really left up to the player, right? But in a situation like this where everybody's playing together symphonically, right? I think that you need to guide the player to how strong you're going to get, piano crescendo. So I would say piano crescendo to what, at mezzo forte or whatever, and then piano subito, unless you intend the players to diminuendo back down to piano. So yeah, and just needs a little bit of cleaning up, right? So probably put the piano crescendo above here with the first voice pointing up and a rest of the second voice. That's just easier on the score reader. And then the same thing here. Yeah, and as far as the scoring is going, I love the triple octave here of flute and bassoon and a first violin in the middle, right? And I would say one thing, and that is that the this flute right in here is just definitely going to get swallowed by the clarinets and buried by the first violins. It might be better to score this note in oboe, or change around what you're doing in the clarinets somewhat. Now, the the question of emphatic color of line is obviously addressed. The question of harmonic density is very nicely done. It's not too heavy, and it does set things up going into the next bar, right? So I feel like the push here on these harmonic voices in here set up the horns, right? So that's very nicely done, and then you just get those that whole horn 6/5 third thing sitting right on the G horns. Yeah, it's just very beautiful and obvious. So I'm just kind of curious why you want to go da in flute and you want to go da ta. If you listen to the piano part, the piano being a percussive instrument, every note is an attack rather than a smoothly slurred to the next one, right? As a string player or wind player could do. So would it be possible to articulate every single note, or to have it mezzo staccato, right? So I'm not totally convinced by the slurring in the winds covering all three notes and the slurring just covering two notes here. But I like this. I like the idea of the half note here. Yeah. Right, and then pizzicato under staccato tenuto or tenuto staccato horns and double reeds. It's such a nice idea. And then we have something very similar to what we heard before, much more more fully orchestrated. Da da, pluck pluck. Yeah, I like that. I like backing off on the clarinets when you go forward. All right, ending here. So now getting to the B section. All that A section is very lovely. Da da, and I really love that you completely wrote out the da da. Right, yeah. So this is kind of how this is a written out version of the turn over the trillo, right? So the trillo happens first, and then the turn happens right afterwards, right? Yeah, it's almost like two shakes, isn't it? And then the turn. So fresh color. So here's an interesting thing: is that you're using your strings quite a bit in different ways, right? So violin in octave with flutes, absorbing the flutes to a large degree. Violins stating the leggermente theme. Violins really the violins will tend to dominate with the way that you've got them here, absorbing the flutes to a degree, and and definitely being a stronger voice than the bassoon until the bassoons get to the bottom, right? So the violins really are taking over here. So violins, 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 right? So I cannot say that this is a fresh new color. Right, it is pretty much just the same color, though. Like later on, when we get to the E section, I think you have more changeovers between different timbres. Yeah. And then complementary timbre, very simple, clarinets and violas working together. So, can't miss. Right, and then here we're going. Here you sort of do a little kind of compromise of the pattern, keeping it off of the higher notes, right? So you're just going dun da 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 da. This like difference. This is one of the few places where I'm not too convinced. Just the leap up the octave and the contrary motion down an octave, because I just feel like you leave a bunch of space right here in the middle, and the sudden widening of the space, especially with the leap upwards. I almost feel like if you had arpeggiated your way upwards as you arpeggiated your way downwards, then the sudden gap right in here wouldn't feel so huge. Very simple, speaking of gaps, thinking ahead to the widening gap and so on. Now, just to point out here, you could have gone A flat, G, written, A flat, G, A flat stopped, G open in your D horns, right? Written or sounding B flat A, right? So da, da, da. And that way, on the accented note, you could have gotten more of a snarl. Right? This still works fine. I almost wish that, maybe sforzando, right, is a little bit better if you're going to use bassoon instead of horn. But I love the fact that you didn't go accents on anything else. It's a little strange here. Mezzo piano crescendo to piano. Piano subito? Yeah. And then it's just sort of the difference in dynamic flexing here. It also makes these feel uneven. If you want to get up to a level of perfection, then you're going to have to think about all the tiny little annoying details, right? So that would be one that I would work on a little bit. All right, so dun 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 dun. Yeah, and this is really nice. I love the fluttering clarinets in here. I don't really know what this is right here. These tied second voices. What is that supposed to be? Is that supposed to be sort of this an octave lower? I'm not even sure. Unless you're going to go like mezzo staccato on both notes. I must feel like you don't even need to slur, right? Like you could just go, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. I think you would just get a more precise staccato there. Just better articulation. But I love the portato in here. I think that works really good. But yeah, just still not sure what that tied second voice is. Right, and then just a little flash of Beethoven temper here is really nice with a roll in the timpani. Yeah, it's all scored out nicely, and I like the expansion here. It's really good. Right, and then for this trill, I don't think the trill is very effective just in clarinet. This might be a good place for, say, a lip trill on C in your G horn, or a trill maybe like in your divisi here. Maybe it would be better to have divisi violas taking this low A, right? Or even playing it non-divisi as an open fifth, very simple for violas to do. And then it wouldn't be open. It would be fingered, but open in the sense of not being a chord. And then just putting the trill here on, because it's just really, I feel that the clarinets need some support here. They're not, no matter what the mock-up says, there just really isn't enough power there. And then, end here with an A fourth in the violas and just F sharp in the second violins. Then I think that would fix this a little bit. Okay, and then once again, just new quality of tone. Once again you just go right back to the string. So just in terms of style, right? Even though like each of these passages is very perfect in their own right, you might want to think about the proportions. Whether there are any choices of freshening the voice when if every single statement of the next theme is always in the strings, right? I mean, to a degree, like you'll see that in Haydn a lot. You'll see that in some early Beethoven, but even early Beethoven freshens things up. What was it? The critique of his first symphony in the newspapers. One critic said, "Oh, it just sounded like a wind band composition." Right? To our ears, it sounds perfectly fine, perfectly symphonic. We're used to Beethoven's style, but back then they were expecting the strings to always state the theme, right? So they weren't used to it opening up with so many winds. All right, and then then mezzo staccato here. Da 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 da. Yeah, and then answered by the seconds and low violas. Da 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 da. Very nice. And then just kind of using the same elements. Da 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 da. Bum bum bum. Very nice. Da 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 da. Yeah, just nice. I'm once again I'm not convinced by double basses just tearing through this not just in terms of dexterity. However, like your tempo is not super fast here, right? Your allegro mono troppo, it's not 138, right? And I think it's even slower than what was my recommended tempo, was like 120 or something like that. So I think you're more like, is it something like 112 or 108 or something? So yeah, I mean, at a slower tempo, more reasonable, but there's a certain kind of scrubbing, like kind of elbow grease kind of a sound coming from these beautiful isolated lines. They're single lines, single line, even though there's doubling, but there's no octaves above or below, right? Then you jump down to here, and suddenly you have the basses going jugga 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 underneath, right? So it's not the most elegant solution here, but I love the pizzicato and the this very Beethoven-like wind harmony above. So and then just like these touches of natural horn, very very nice in your D horn. I think there's really no need to trade off from first, and then there's the second there, and then there's the first, and so on. You can just have the first play the whole thing. That's no big deal. And then da 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 da. You noticed how in the when I was playing back your mock-up that I sort of moved the page over so that people could just see this before everything jumped back, just for the sake of one bar, right? And then this just goes back to the original strategy. It's very nice. I think you might be able to hear some kind of weird moaning sound in the background. That is my cat snoring. Okay, so I feel that I feel that you did really great at the beginning here. So let's jump forward to compare how that all works with the E section, right? So let's just refresh our memories really quickly for the benefit of the audience. Okay, how did things start? It was flute an octave over the strings, mostly string accompaniment with a little bit of horns, and then we added clarinets and bassoon and so on with some some pedal G's, pedal sounding G's. The leggermente was in the strings. And then this da 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 was a triple octave flute, violins, and bassoons with a little bit more texture here with clarinet and second flute. All right. Okay. So fix that in your mind. All right. So now let's check out E. All right. So here we've got we go to harmony. Da 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 ba ba bum. Yeah. Right. And then that just like once you get to the to the repeated D that serves the purpose. It's in the harmony anyway of the piano part. So yeah, so very very nice. The flutes here, you've got that same strategy as before, right? Flutes, violins, and bassoons, right? In this case, there will be more of a presence from each element. The bassoons going into their beautiful, rich central register right in here will not get stomped on too heavily by the violins above it, and the violins won't slurp up too much of the resonance of the flutes. Not too much. There's some. And I'll talk about this part, the lead into it, when we look at the D section in a little while. Yeah, and then just like beautiful use of natural horns here, very very logical. Yeah, and you're just totally keeping it parallel, da 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 da, except for these A octaves here. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, and then just you're keeping it at thirds, da 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 da, and then of course octaves in the violins. Yeah, it's just really lovely, and then just like this little walk down here in your D horns. Okay, and then once again, we've got the second violins answered by the cellos. I almost said bassoons, with a little bit of harmony in the middle here. All right, we've got these little D thirds. And then I love this. This is very Beethoven-like. The answering the whole episode in winds, double reeds talking to each other with the clarinets in the middle. That's just so cool. Okay, and now here, this is very very interesting. The it starts off in octaves but then telescopes, right? So I almost feel that I like everything that's happening here, but I don't like the way that the telescoping ends up so barren. And I am wondering whether or not whether you could solve the problem like this. Take this voice here, right here, this written F and E flat. Give it to your first bassoon and maintain the existing part for second bassoon. Okay? And then leave these upper half notes for your first clarinet or second clarinet if you like. And then have the other voice take over the octave and play it all the way through, right? I just feel the absence so much, right? And then we would end up, we end up with the octaves here anyway, right? It would just come right in at the right place, right there. I like the really concentrated. The unison that we've got right in here of these two parts in the flutes and oboes. Of course, the A is really at a disadvantage here, but it's okay just for that second, right? For that one moment. Yeah. Yeah, I just feel like that's my only objection there. But everything else I feel is scored very beautifully. I love the pizzicato in here, and then pizzicato, pluck 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 with the da da da, and then just really really great on the dynamic shifts here. I don't think I didn't notice how you changed the harmony in here, but it was still okay. If you feel that if that's a better solution for you than Beethoven's, then I can't fault you. But I would prefer the Beethoven's original harmony in here. Yeah, and then just kind of going back and forth. And I think that this also is a really nice, fresh change compared to what you did before. And then going to arco. Once again, not too sure about, slur, separate note. Right, and back to pizzicato. Okay, and then once again, we're stating that B theme in strings. So, yeah. Da 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 da, bum bum dum ba dum. I really love the idea of first flute and first oboe. It's kind of an extra number one here. You need to rearrange some objects here, and you don't really need the second rest here. But doubled by divisi violas. I think that's a very, very cool idea. Da da, and then just as I've got it marked in my criteria, previous approach may be the only workable strategy, right? And I think that works fine with your a little bit of contrary motion in the clarinets, and here you leap up as you jump down and so on. It's still a little weird for me. I still think this needs a little bit of work, but that's all right. Then da 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 da, yeah, and then this dancing part. I like the alternating notes here being closer to the little fragmented melody, and then we're back to da 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 da. And with D horns, once again, you could do this as stopped, open, stopped, open, stopped, open. Pianissimo, low oboe, it's certainly possible, and it'll make this nice and punchy here. But I think that if everybody else is going piano here and mezzo piano in this, then I think that you could just leave your oboe piano here. Right? But once again, that would be so great on a D horn. All right, and then expanding outwards, you have some of the same elements as before. They all work really great. No notes. And then once again, just you got the trill here on this written C, and you could definitely give that. There's just really there's kind of no need for having against that the measured tremolo here in your seconds. I think it would be better just to drop that pitch down to this same one in here, just like trilling, trilling, going from the A to the G. I think it is much stronger in there. And then once again, statement in the strings, da 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 da. And I wonder if you could have just dovetailed to this, like just ended on a B, dovetailing into this, right? And I think that would be, it right now just feels a little disconnected, right? And then the same thing. Is there another one? That might be the only one. Okay, all right. So, yeah, and then just I love the little touch of timpani right in here. Yeah, mezzo staccato there. Yeah, it's all great. I mean, your horn scoring is really good here. And then right, sort of a tutti here. Da da dum. Oh, yeah, just a 16th right here is fine. Da da dum, da 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 dum. See, I think that in this situation here, you should end on the C, the dovetailing on that sounding C here with the first. That was what I was thinking of. Now here you don't need to dovetail because it's a in the piano part it's a huge drop, right? It's Beethoven, is intentionally jumping down a seventh, right? So there's no need to dovetail. Yeah, and then just like these D's in here, pianissimo in the D horns. That's really great. Yeah, and then da 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 da, and a little trading off in your bassoons. It might be easier to trade off on the high note and the low note rather than like in the half bar. Yeah. Yeah, very cool. And just kind of the same. I like the absence of the double basses here. Here they're great. But yeah, here that's if you're leaving them out here, you should leave them out in the earlier section. Yeah, and then just going to violas, reaching upwards to your clarinets, right? And then this kind of fluttering like you did before, having the seconds take over. I would finish this on these pitches, on this F octave here in your clarinets, right? Just to get the dovetailing a little bit smoother. And then all of this détaché bowing, pretty much. Yeah. And this is a really good, I would say seamlessly back to the development section. Yeah, and then staccatissimo. You might want to put in like ritardando seconda volta, right? Might work a little bit better, just so that the audience is really guided to the final, the very final chord in the repeat. Because there's a danger that this ending will just feel too abrupt orchestrally, right? Okay, so really great recapping of all of your elements. There's just so many fun things in here. Yeah. Yeah. So cool. All right, so let's jump back to D for development. Right, and then da 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 da. Yeah. Da 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 da. So double basses and bassoon. And then like you're just coming to a stop here, right? This is also one thing that really made the double basses feel unnatural is the way that this tied together here with the with a little pedal D here in the bassoon and the second bassoon, first bassoon taking the little figuration over it, right? And the and the double basses coming to a stop here. I think if you just leave the double basses out, this all feels really natural. Okay. Da 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 bum 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 da 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 bum bum. Yeah. Okay, so I think that somebody has got to finish up on on D flat, or like it's got to resolve somehow, or D, excuse me. Da, 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 bum, bum. See, like there's no like this little melodic phrase doesn't ever resolve, right? It just ends as a B flat chord in all the other parts, right? But with like where's the D? It's here on this right here, but it's yeah. So I mean, it wouldn't kill you at all just to have your oboe solo to end on a quarter note of D. And this stuff is all nice in here. I'm a little concerned about the mezzo staccato in the seconds and legato in the firsts. But I mean, I guess that flows. I mean, I would almost prefer portato here. Yeah, but I mean, considering what you're doing, I don't know. I mean, I guess it sort of works. I'm not hugely fond of this convention of the slur going down to the note head rather than the stem the stem end when the stems reverse. It just feels a little weird to me. A little harder to sight read at a, it's, I don't know, it just feels a little cluttered. Okay. Yeah, and then this is lovely writing of the bassoons and the violas working together, or second bassoon. Yeah. Yeah, and and you keep it much lighter right in here with, with the single winds and so on. All right, and then, yeah, just kind of lovely intense here. Plum, plum. And I love this mezzo forte, exactly right. The little introduction to the flash of temper should be strong, right, rather than just da 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 ba da 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 da. Rather, it's da 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 bum bum bum. I almost wonder if this should be a little bit more emphatic rather than slurred. Right, you just like cut out, just get rid of the slurs, ta 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 ta, rather than ta ta. It just feels less like we aren't punching the audience in the face as much when it's slurred. And then then just so beautiful the way it drops, da 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 da. Right. And this is so cool. Just these little bits and pieces of winds, and the the little accompaniment figure trading off between different voices. Yeah, I think that just really works because you've got your overall pattern or run just kind of continuing, and then it's being kind of it's being fragmented by other voices, and they're going to stand out a little bit from the mix, right? I sort of feel, if this is piano, I almost feel like these little fragments should stand out a little bit. Do you know what I mean? There's a way of just marking it up, mezzo piano or mezzo forte, and then just jumping back to piano and so on. Just so those things can stick out a little bit. Yeah. Now here, this is what I was talking about. So this is all going, this is first, then you're adding the second, then there's a due. So this is very inexactly scored. What you need to do is split these voices, right? So the unisons are sharing a note head with stems in opposite directions, and then you've got this little interval right in here, and so on. And then you've got instead of having a tie here, you would have an eighth note in your second voice, right? I'm not sure, you're saying the two should be below rather than above, right? So first would be going F sharp, A, G, F sharp, and then you would have an F sharp eighth note, and then G, F sharp unison, and then here you could just go a due and get rid of the two voices. But I think here you should have split stems, right? And same thing here. Yeah, just like you do here. Yeah, and it's it's sort of brute force scoring right in here as intensify and dovetail to the clarinets and everything else. I mean, I think it works really great. Right, and then we just end up with a bum, bum, bum. I like the way you keep it simple. Sitting on our sounding D octaves here, and then just the simplest thing possible for your D horns, just going up thirds. Root, median, dominant, and yeah, it just works really, really great. Yeah. Yeah, and that's so lovely right in there. You could almost even just have you could almost have your your violist just playing an A here, like this, and then coming in here, right? As opposed to doubling the cellos. And then going right back into these thirds. That's all really lovely. Okay, so yeah, I mean, as you can hear, even though I did have some picky little issues, which I hope would will help you on the road to perfection and so on. I really love the the wonderful ear you have for the style here, and I love a lot of your choices. I love the how you are channeling your own voice into that of Beethoven and kind of coming up with something that really feels period, and it really feels like it's ready to go to the stands with a few of those little tweaks that possibly, if they make sense to you. So I think you should try to get this. I think you should try to get this played, and I think you should orchestrate the second movement. I think that it would, I think it's got a shot. Um, you know, Really, really great work there, Peter. And look, thank you, just like for a couple of things before I wrap this up. First of all, I want to thank you for, um, you know, like how patient you've been in the light of having this been delayed about 2 years. I like to imagine in a perfect world, about exactly 2 years ago, I would have been releasing this, right, with the same comments. But not only that, but just how encouraging you were while I was going through everything. Very kind comments. Just telling me not to rush, and just being very supportive and supporting on Patreon and all those other things. I just want to say that I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate all the comments and constructive feedback that you've given to other participants in this challenge. That all means a lot to me. Okay, so, and it also will mean a lot to me if other people watching this will join in with that, and give Peter a little bit of love as he is giving to your scores when he's got a chance. And if you've got any words of encouragement or appreciation or any thoughts, some things that I might have missed or not had a chance to, didn't have the time to really address, please let him know. And with that, I will just say thanks so much, everybody, for sticking with this. And I do think I'm going to make it to the end of this this run of challenges. I think that we're going to hit that November goal of wrapping it up by then. But hopefully there won't be any delays or any changes to my health. Things seem to be cruising along pretty steadily right now. So thanks, everybody. I will see you all tomorrow.